Thank you everyone for joining, and a very happy new year to all of you. We have a full house today, and today's webinar will cover the findings of the 2019 CEO study on sustainability, which is a joint research program conducted by the UN Global Compact and Accenture every 3 years, dating back to 2007. My name is Lise Kingo. I'm the CEO and Executive Director of the UN Global Compact, the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative with more than 9,500 companies from over 160 countries that have committed to aligning strategies and operations with 10 universal principles on human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption, and taking actions that advance societal goals. I'm joined by Lacy from Accenture.
Is that my turn to say here? Hello. Hello, Lisa, and Happy New Year, everybody.
Thank you, Peter, and good to have you with us today. I will begin with a high-level overview of the study and provide a macro picture of what the business world is dealing with. And next, Peter will cover the study's key findings. I'll wrap up by introducing an exciting new initiative, and we will finally close with Q&As. So if you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box in your control panel. We will address all questions at the end of the webinar. So let's start. The CEO study program is an effort to enhance understanding and commitment between the UN and the private sector. The program is an extensive review of the advancing corporate sustainability movement and the publications coalesce dominant views of CEOs, business leaders, and UN executives to track developments in sustainability. With 7 CEO study publications to date, including the 2019 study, the UN Global Compact and Accenture have established a solid and successful collaboration for this program. So this year, more than 1,000 CEOs participated in the study from companies of all sizes across about 100 countries and more than 20 industry sectors. Together with the UN Global Compact Progress Report, this forms the most comprehensive research to date on the business contribution to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And to capture the rich qualitative insights and case studies on business innovation, we also conducted in-depth interviews with over 100 CEOs at the forefront of change on these topics. So thank you to all of you who participated. Your insights have been invaluable to the study and delivering on this report. So specifically, our in-depth conversations with CEOs focused on some of the largest and most respected names in the world, with the likes of Bayer, Schneider Electric, and Woolworth. They covered candid reflections on the opportunities and challenges to sustainability. So the interviews and survey also spanned across 21 industries and 99 countries across all 6 major continents. So let's have a look at the global background and context. So although the study focuses on CEOs and business contributions towards sustainability, we'll start with a step back and consider the broader context. So the Sustainable Development Goals, also known as the Global Goals, are a set of 17 goals with 169 sub-targets, each with key indicators to measure progress. The goals aim to address the global challenges we face, including those related to poverty, inequality, climate, environmental degradation, prosperity, and peace and justice. They were adopted in 2015 by all United Nations member states as a universal call to action to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure that all people enjoy peace and prosperity by 2030. So the underlying context for this year's study is that the world is running out of time, and there is a rising urgency in the air. The 2019 Progress Report towards the SDGs report of the Secretary General, which we presented during a December webinar, finds that progress on the 17 goals is slow, and pathways to meet the global goals are not yet advancing at the speed or scale required. Although environmental degradation has caught the viral attention of traditional and social media, deforestation is up 40% compared to 2014. Although industries, governments, and consumers are more vocal than ever regarding gender inequalities, it will still take another 200 years to close the economic gender gap globally under existing rates. And although the IPCC recommends reducing emissions 45% by 2030 to avoid some of the worst outcomes on climate, relying on current climate commitments would result in a temperature rise of 3.5 degrees Celsius. We are clearly not doing enough, fast enough to achieve the global goals. So, despite real progress being made by the business community, there is a clear recognition among CEOs that action is not measuring up to the size of the challenge or previous levels of ambition. The business community has an important role to play in addressing these challenges. And in our fourth triennial CEO study, published in 2016, the vast majority, close to 78% of CEOs, saw opportunities to contribute to the global goals through their core business. And almost half said that business would be the most important actor in delivering on the global goals. In the 2019 study on sustainability, that sheds a candid and closer light on business efforts towards addressing the global goals. Although only 1/5 of CEOs currently believe that their business is playing a critical role in addressing the global goals, 48% of companies have begun implementing sustainability into their core operations. Now is the time for business to step up action, or we risk a lost decade ahead of the global goals without the urgent and required business contribution. So let me end my introduction to this webinar by quoting the UN Secretary General, who has very strong views on these matters, of course. His perspective is that we have to mobilize the private sector. Moving forward, collaboration with business is crucial to meet the Sustainable Development Goals, and we are not on track on this. So Peter, let me hand over to you to talk a little bit more about the details and the outcome of the study.
Thank you very much, Lise. I think that quote from Secretary General is a brilliant segue into the results section. My name is Peter Lacy, and I lead Accenture strategy and also our sustainability practice. And I'm proud to say that we've been a strong partner to the Global Compact, now dating back nearly 15 years. I'm looking forward to sharing this year's findings, and I'd also like as you did, Lise, to thank many people on this call, either directly or through their CEOs, for sharing their rich insights from across industries that helped us to put this piece of work together. Let me start by talking about sustainable business trends and opportunities. And I would reiterate the key message from our study that is exemplified by the Secretary General's quote. Although we've seen progress over the last decade, the 1,000 CEOs that we spoke to told us that the broader sentiment is that high-level commitment is not, I repeat, not translating into enough concrete action and impact. And CEOs that we spoke to were very self-reflective and very pragmatic in outlining the actions that are needed to shift beyond incrementalism towards fundamental shifts in how we conduct business. Before I discuss challenges and calls to action, however, let's start with a few incredibly positive and promising trends before we talk about some of the challenges. So let's move to the next slide, please. Sustainability is now firmly on the agenda of global CEOs. That's what we heard. Since 2007, CEOs have shown growing commitment, belief, and action on sustainability, and they see real opportunities not just to do the right thing, but to create competitive advantage. 99% of the CEOs that we spoke to of the world's largest companies told us that sustainability is important or very important to the future success of their businesses. That's true across most regions, and CEO sentiment reflects the growing importance of sustainability, with the average percentage of CEOs citing sustainability as very important, rising more than 10 percentage points from 2013 to 2019. As Alan Jofet, the CEO at Unilever, said to me when we spent time together, there's no difference between our business strategy and our sustainability strategy. They are totally integrated, and we see that increasingly the case across many of the leading members of the Compact. Next slide, please. So leading companies, we discovered, are realizing value from sustainability, and they believe that the value at stake and the size of the prize, both in terms of the impact on the SDGs and commercially, will grow significantly in the next 5 to 10 years. The good news is that they also see a significant reduction in the inability, so the barriers to linking sustainability to business value. So those barriers have fallen consistently from 37% of CEOs citing that as a barrier in 2013 to only 26% in 2019. I read that as the business case becoming increasingly clear for many companies. And business leaders are creating genuine value. More than 2/3 of the companies we surveyed see value in brand and reputation and intangible assets. We heard about Unilever, for example, where Unilever sustainable living brands are delivering 75% of the company's 75% of the company's growth, and purposeful brands are at the heart of that. We heard it in terms of revenue, where more than 40% of CEOs told us that sustainability is driving revenue growth, new markets, new products, new services, delivering more for the consumer, delivering more in business-to-business partnerships. Companies like Tesco, companies like Royal DSM told us about increasing pull, but also increasingly preparedness to innovate together with value chain partners. And then thirdly, we also heard that sustainability is being made sense of in the context of cost and driving efficiency and productivity. A little more than half of the companies, 51% that we surveyed, said that they expect significant bottom line business value driven promises and prizes from their environmental and social governance investments. Companies like Sodexo, for example, who have committed and already seeing significant progress reducing food waste by 50% by 2025, with an array of technology and behavioral driven change initiatives to deliver that and reducing the cost of that waste. We also, fourthly, heard that companies are using this as a lever, using ESG, using going after the SDGs as a lever for better risk management. Mars Incorporated has used DNA sequencing to map the cocoa gene, accelerating the cocoa breeding process from between 12 and 18 years to between 7 and 8 years to make sure that it has a resilient future supply chain. Important for business, important for sustainability. So those are just some of the examples of how companies are realizing value, and we heard many of those. Moving to the next slide, please. But we did hear from CEOs on a number of occasions that there are very real barriers to scale and speed on the SDGs. A few examples of those are given here. While political uncertainty is top of mind, it's not the only thing that they're concerned about. Global issues are distracting efforts for some companies. 2/3, the highest we've ever seen in the CEO study, 2/3 of CEOs, 63% said political uncertainty across markets is the most important issue for their company's competitive strategies. And 42% said that uncertainty on everything from carbon emissions to global trade, 42% said that it is reducing or stalling their sustainability efforts, something that we need to think carefully about in what we've called the decade to deliver. On the flip side, there are important enablers that many companies are seeing issues like environmental degradation, trust in business, urbanization as compelling reasons to do more. We heard Pernod Ricard, Braskem, DuPont, CEOs from all over the world describing different drivers for their industries and why it is that they need to step up to the plate. Moving to the next slide, please. One thing that I found extremely interesting and notable in this year's CEO study, having led 5 of these CEO studies now dating back to 2007, was the prominence of inequality and the need for inequality to be tackled at the systems level and for business to play a real role in that, absolutely at the forefront of CEOs' views and minds. We haven't seen it as acutely at the forefront in previous editions, and they talked about everything from tax to living wages at very practical levels, through to some of the more challenging situations that they find in markets where some of the economic models that have been employed have not delivered for the middle and working classes over long periods of time. And we heard CEOs tell us that tackling the environmental side of sustainability and the SDGs right across industries is not possible unless we also tackle rising inequality and its destabilizing effect on different economies. So a real mood swing there, and the importance of addressing sustainability holistically and very much from an inequality perspective. Moving to the next slide, please. CEOs also told us that consumers and employees remain the key drivers of change. As you heard earlier, that's not discounting policymakers, regulators, multilateral organizations, and the importance of setting the regulatory context and the policy background for sustainability and its ability to distract in cases. But day to day, CEOs told us that they're driven by their consumers and their employees. Sustainability is becoming table stakes in addressing the voice of consumers, which are more informed and have tremendous growing expectations for companies to be more responsible stewards of the world. For example, at the Chemours company told us our customers and their consumers want more sustainable products. So investing in sustainable products and operations is a competitive advantage. Sodexo told us that we're serving a variety of populations and the voice of the consumer has tremendously evolved in line with the 17 UN SDGs and the expectations of new generations. And they will shift and they will force a shift in the way business operates. And it's a very positive trend. And I think we heard from many CEOs, on top of the consumer and employee base, that also increasingly their communities, and particularly their families, increasingly as they see the next generations coming through and pressing ever harder in Generation Z and others to do more, to be able to take a stand, to incorporate sustainability into the way that their companies live and work. Next slide, please. And what CEOs told us was that as societal expectations intensify, trust is becoming increasingly important to competitiveness. I'll go back to that finding I shared earlier, that 76% of CEOs told us that citizen trust will be critical to competitiveness in their industry in the next 5 years. We consistently saw trust as a key driver for big companies and small. And it's clear that trust has become material. For example, at Accenture ourselves, we run the Strategy Competitive Agility Index, and more than 54%, well over half of the 7,000 companies we examined, experienced a material drop in trust at some point during the past 2.5 years. And that equates to $180 billion in revenue. So it's clear that trust is not something that is simply conceptual. It's not something that is simply about values and ethics. It matters to the business. It matters to shareholder value. It matters to business performance. CEOs, as you see here from the De Beers Group, are very clear that it's becoming a binary question whether or not CEOs do or don't trust you. And the time will come, as the CEO of De Beers also told me, not on this slide, the time will come when there will be a threshold question that consumers will ask. And on top of that, that answer will create competitive advantage one way or the other in a number of different categories and across many different industries. Next slide, please. One interesting finding from this year's CEO study was the role of technology. We heard again and again from CEOs that against this backdrop of extreme cost consciousness, political uncertainty, and still challenges in scaling the business case, we heard CEOs say that in the decade to come, the decade that we need to get on the right track in delivering the SDGs as business, the biggest investments that are being made in their companies, the biggest investments that are being made by governments are in technology. And that the real key is to use technology as a driver of sustainability and to embed sustainability into digital, physical, biological investment choices. And that really was the first time that we've heard that with that kind of strength. Digital came out on top in terms of the most important of the types of technology in the fourth industrial revolution that are being applied to sustainability, whether or not that's from trust and transparency and traceability in a world of connected devices and AI and machine learning, or whether or not that was about driving more productive use of assets in a world of connected devices that reduce carbon emissions, water, material use. It's not surprising perhaps that digital sat across all industries and therefore was a higher percentage return. Actually, when you drill into specific industries like energy, like electricity, like chemicals and materials, physical and biological technologies in areas like manufacturing, in producing the next generation of renewable energies or renewable materials were also extremely important and featured very, very highly depending on those specific industry challenges and opportunities. But what I would take away from this is that technology is very much at the front and center of whether we will or will not achieve the SDGs, given the levels of investment that are being put into technologies right across the board. Moving to the next slide, please. But despite some of the extraordinary advances that we see, and we talked previously about the technology revolution and what its potential could be, despite some of those opportunities, despite the challenges that we may have in moving forward, it's not enough, and we need to get to the tipping points that we need. And I think what Eric Rondelat, the CEO and chairman at Signify, and Peter Holt-Nielsen at Novozymes, I think, signify here with their quotes, is that there was a very self-reflective attitude from CEOs. And even in these CEOs, many of whom who are doing more than most in investing in the change, investing in the disruption, investing in the positive impact that we require. Even those CEOs believe that we're not doing enough as a business community. Only 21% of CEOs believe that business is currently playing a critical role in contributing to the global goals. And that number is set against the backdrop of many CEOs believing that all of the tools that we need and the examples of best practice out there are enough if we find the right policy lenses, if we find the right business action, if we can activate the consumer. So it's not that we don't have the resources available. It's not that we can't do it. We can, just looking at all of the good practices. But we need to step up as business leaders, as governments and regulators, and in our other stakeholder roles. Next slide, please. And some of the challenges that we heard from different CEOs are well covered in some of these quotes here from different CEOs that we spoke to. In many anecdotal cases, especially in the resources and retail sectors, we heard CEOs state that transitions to sustainability don't necessarily command a strong enough market pull or high enough returns. Additionally, outside of Europe, environmental, social, and governance issues are often treated primarily as an investment disqualifier, as a screen, as a nice to have. In the words of EDF Energy's Simon Rossi, there's a great disparity between the public statements put out by investors and their apathy towards sustainability behind closed doors. And as well as those external challenges, there are internal challenges. Within companies, many of the CEOs we spoke to talked about the need for competing strategic priorities to wrestle, in some cases, with long-term sustainability investments and goals. And we heard that there are barriers to implementing strategy in the business functions and through their supply chains. So there's a realistic view of what those barriers are, but I hope, as we're going to talk about next, there are also some important solutions. Moving to the next slide. So in response to that 21% of CEOs who feel that we're doing enough, there's 80% of CEOs who don't feel that we're doing enough. And what we heard from CEOs in this year's study and reiterated by the Secretary General's quote, but also felt by business, is that it isn't enough. We do need to do more, and 2020 has to be the year that we step up. Very clear call for business action. CEOs are not content with the status quo. More than two-thirds, 71% of CEOs believe that with increased commitment and action, business can play a critical role. Here you see two of the CEOs of two of the world's most important corporations, Heineken and Siemens, stressing that need to step up, stressing that need not to blame a system for failure of action, but to step up as an individual CEO, as a CEO within your company, and leading by example from the front, through organizations, through commitments like the Global Compact. Next slide, please. And building on that call to action, what we heard were a number of different steps. And I hope that those of you on the webinar, if anything that you write down and you note and you think about what to take away, as well as some of the SDG ambition conversation that Lise is going to lead next, I would say it's important to remember these, which are the distillation of what CEOs felt was necessary. So firstly, to raise ambition for your company and industry, starting at home with your own company. Secondly, to collaborate to shape science-based solutions. So making sure that as we go to meet the SDGs, that industry contributions as a whole and individual business contributions are not grounded in incremental, are not grounded in what we think is achievable, but are grounded in the scientific reality of what we need to achieve through the SDGs to put the world on a sustainable track. And third, personally, to lead the acceleration of action to 2030 within companies, with customers, with the broader ecosystems, including governments, but also right through your value chain. These are the things that we heard in terms of threshold actions that are going to be required across all of the 17 goals. And we identified initial examples, illustrative examples, that are going to differ by industry through this work of what those baseline actions might look like. For instance, companies can have a significant impact using these three as a framework on the climate and gender goals that Lise raised at the beginning, such as by setting 1.5-degree based targets or ensuring equal pay and healthcare across global operations. For example, equal pay for women alone could result in 447 billion annual gain for women and their families, and an estimated 160 trillion to the global economy. And we saw goals right across the patch, from goal 3 and some of the investment and the innovation the Bristol Myers Squibbs have been putting forward in areas like HIV, goal 5 on gender equality, Rabobank's initiative of cross-mentoring women's employees within senior executives, goal 9 in industry innovation and infrastructure with BMW Group and the City of Hamburg signing an MOU to provide extensive coverage of electric and hybrid vehicles for sharing within cities. All of these demonstrating a commitment to go above and beyond what anyone else dares to do. And so you see here that these examples, I hope, are examples that can inspire each of your companies, you as leaders, to add your own examples of what it means to go above and beyond what anyone else dares to do. Next slide, please. And it's going to take collective leadership. It's going to take collective leadership in, for example, areas like the circular economy that we heard so many CEOs speak about, for the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, shaping science-based collective solutions. It's going to take leveling the playing field and taking responsibility for the competitiveness and sustainability of the marketplace and even amongst industry rivals, and accelerating solutions and sectors and transitions across entire sectors. Or it means not just thinking globally, but thinking very locally, as Novo Nordisk did, where businesses step up on local partnerships to drive action on global imperatives, in this case, on diabetes. Next slide. So collaborative leadership, collective leadership is what's required. And that collaborative leadership and that shift, which allows us to think at the level of individual companies, at the organizational level, at the ecosystem level, and at the organizational level, is really at the heart of the 9 leadership qualities that we heard CEOs talk about during our many discussions, 120 one-to-ones, more than 1,000 online responses. So at the organizational level, it's about being a front runner. It's about driving market demand for sustainability, and it's about building cultures of responsibility and accountability. At the ecosystem level, it's about making sure that you are science-based, making sure you understand the technical issues that challenge your industry and that you need to get right. And it's about doing that across multiple partners through your value chains, end to end, and with ecosystems of different partners that can help you to provide the solutions. And sometimes that will mean being competitive. Other times it will mean collaborating non-competitively, creating pre-competitive spaces, taking responsibility for industry collaboration at an entire sector level. And then at the individual level, CEOs own everyday activities, behaviors, the signals they send their employees, their consumers, their business partners. It's about taking sustainability personally, having your own story, understanding it, taking leadership as the CEO, but also as the ultimate Chief Sustainability Officer. It's about driving the discussion with investors and stakeholders so that you can have a conversation which is about impact, but also is about return on investment, that is about how sustainability primes businesses to be more competitive. And it's about authenticity, integrity, vulnerability, and openness and willing to learn, and being open to new ideas, being open to flat hierarchies where the next idea, the next solution, the next breakthrough can come from anywhere, not just around you in your immediate sphere of influence, not just within your organization, but across the entire ecosystem in which you operate. Next slide, please. And let me wrap up here and hand back to Lisa with a very concrete and pragmatic way for CEOs and for organizations to act on this. But I thought that these three examples of CEOs stepping up were good examples that illustrate what it might look like for you and your company to take action. Whether or not that's at the organizational level, as Christine Holgate has taken, in terms of driving and shaping investment decisions, whether or not it's about the ecosystem level as a market maker who can work with consumers because of their scale, work with regulators to shape preferences, to shape new opportunities for people to reflect their interest in sustainable development in the products and purchases in their everyday lives, or if it's at the individual level where these things, like as in the case of Franz Muller at Delhaize, have really moved him personally, having been on the journeys, having been at the coalface and seeing what the impact of sustainability does. All of these are part of the tapestry, the rich tapestry that's required for business leaders to step up, organizationally, at the ecosystem level, and individually, to make sure that we achieve the business contribution that's required for the Sustainable Development Goals. And I'll leave you with a couple of thoughts from two CEOs that I spent a lot of time with. One from João Paulo Ferreira, the CEO at Natura, and the other from Jean-Pascal Tricoire, the chairman and CEO at Schneider Electric. So at Natura, João Paulo said, I can give a nice speech and put the responsibility in consumers. They're not willing to pay. We have to make them aware. Or we can turn it around. We're going to do what is right. And if it costs more, we tell that to consumers. If they're willing to pay, that is great. Otherwise, we're going to reduce our cost margin somewhere and find efficiencies elsewhere. Stepping up and being counted. Hopefully not always needed, but doing the right thing at top of mind. And then for the first time in history, as Jean-Pascal Tricoire told us, we can all participate in a step change in efficiency and the rare opportunity to reconcile the paradox between progress for all and a sustainable future for our planet. With that, I hand you over back to Lise to pick up on the SDG ambition.
Peter, thank you so much for a great presentation of some of the very rich contents of the CEO study. We are also very proud of the partnership that we have with Accenture to repeat this exercise every third year. And it is amazing when you ask the same questions again and again, and you can see how things are developing. Where we clearly are right now is that 4 years into the global goals and the 2030 agenda, we are both seeing great progress in terms of companies' engagement in both the global goals and in the 10 principles. We know from the progress report that more than 81% of global compact companies are engaged in the global goals and are taking action on the goals. And we know that more than 90% have policies and are embedding the 10 principles. So that's the good part of the story. But as Peter and I have been alluding to, we are very much behind when it comes to making the goals by 2030. It's very much, the gaps are very much in the areas of climate, inequalities. Gender is a strong example of this. So we have to find ways to speed up the engagement behind the goals so we can really see the needle move. And as a UN entity, it's a natural thing for the UN Global Compact to take action when we can see clearly from all this research we have been putting forward that we are not on track with making the global goals a reality by 2030. So it is on this backdrop that we are now launching our new SDG ambition, which is basically an initiative that will challenge and support companies in being more bold, more ambitious, and more transformational. So over the next 2 years, our new implementation model will be rolled out through our 69 local networks across the world to challenge and to support companies of all sizes in raising ambition and deepening implementation, exactly as you have heard Peter talk about in many different dimensions of companies, no matter what sector, what geography, or what size they have. So ensuring that the SDG ambition is outcome-oriented, practical, and globally relevant, we have partnered with SAP and with Accenture to give their strength in helping to deliver transformational change and their depth of technical understanding of organizational and systems integration. So in other words, we have teamed up with two very strong partners that we believe can help us at the UN Global Compact really anchor our new implementation framework and model across companies in all geographies in the world. So we invite you to join us in this critical opportunity to bring the business community together to raise ambitions and to deepen implementation. And more details will follow when we launch in Davos in only a couple of weeks. And when we begin to flesh out this very concrete response to the challenges that we as companies and businesses are facing across the world. So we have now come to the moment in our webinar where we are very keen to look at some of the questions that all of you have been posing for the last 45 minutes. And it's hard to choose between all the great questions, but there is particularly one that I would like to start by asking you, Peter. So the question is, why are CEOs not doing more to change their own company when they are very keen for new economic models to emerge? Did you hear my question, Peter? I think it has come up.
No, I heard it. So thank you, Lise. Sorry, I was speaking, but I was on mute, obviously.
Okay. Well, let's hear your response.
So look, it's a great question to kick off, Lise. I'll give you a very short answer so we can get more questions in. I think it would be unfair to say that the CEOs we spoke to are not stepping up and trying to change their companies, because many of the examples that I gave at the beginning, and I could give you another 50, are examples of the companies that we spoke to and that are leading members of the compact that are doing a lot. And I would say in many cases, if all of their sectors and industries were doing the same as they're doing, and we were able to raise the bar holistically across those sectors, we would be well on the way to achieving the SDGs. So there is a sample bias here, which I'm sure you're aware of, I'm aware of, which is these are already companies in many cases, you know, who have made a lot of progress. They may need to make more, but they've made a lot of progress. So that's the first part of the answer. I think the second part of the answer is they are absolutely saying that change needs to start at home, not just in their companies, but with them personally and individually. So that framework we talked about at the end, the individual, the organization, the ecosystem, is something that I think impressively, actually, and more humbly than I've seen in the past, CEOs are saying, we're not getting it all right, we need to do a lot more.
Absolutely, Peter. And these are clearly transformational changes that you are not doing from one day to the other. You know, many stakeholders need to be aligned, not least the whole financial sector, to make this happen. And at a very sort of, how should I say, company focused issue. We also have a question saying that we mention in the study that only 23% of the CEOs feel that their boards are playing a key role in this change process. So Peter, what is your view on the role of the board in this sustainable transformation process? I mean, is it on the agenda, or is it more sort of something that's being discussed next to the financial reports, results of the company?
I think it's a mixed bag, Lisa. I think the danger with a study as large as this is that it covers, as you rightly said at the beginning, you know, 100 countries and more than 20 industries. And within that, lots of different ownership structures. So, for example, I think what we heard from CEOs is there are many examples of family boards or boards run by foundations that are extremely active and are driving, and the families in many cases of very large organizations are driving a lot of activity. In the publicly listed companies, I would say it's more of a mixed bag. We did hear from CEOs that it's a regular business item, an agenda. It may be a quarterly update, you know, it may be every few months, and there are often subcommittees at board level that are dealing with these issues. But at times, CEOs told us it feels a bit like a box ticking exercise, more about high-level corporate governance, risk and reputation, making sure things are being taken, that are being taken seriously, but not necessarily a driving force pushing CEOs to go further. I think that also resonates with the finding from CEOs, which is that despite the fact you can tell a positive story about investors and them taking it more seriously, and them writing shareholder letters, you know, every year talking about long-term value, or looking at increasingly the growth of some of the subsets and sectors in the SRI space or in renewable energy. So there is a good news story you can tell. But what a lot of CEOs told me was that in the conversation they have with their really big investors, often who are represented on the boards that you mentioned, actually it just never features. I was talking to the CFO of a very large global food business just a day or two ago, who said that he's never had a mainstream investor ever ask him about those questions. Even it's going to be one of the biggest deals. And yeah, so I think there's a very mixed view about boards and about investors.
Yes.
A lot more to do, I would say.
A lot more to do, Peter, and we have a few more questions about the role of the financial sector and also the role of corporate finance in basically putting responsible business on the strategic agenda of a company. So I want to kick off by just mentioning to everybody who's listening today that the UN Global Compact and the UN PRI recently launched a new CFO task force where we want to gather CFOs from global compact companies to ensure that the corporate finance unit is very conscious of the big role it is playing to drive sustainable investments in the company. It could be in ensuring that employees' pension funds are invested through the lens of the global goals. It could be in foreign direct investments, ensuring that environmental and social concerns are part of the investments. And it could also be in raising debt, where we are seeing new financial instruments like SDG bonds popping up as new ways of raising funds that will go into global goals initiatives. So Peter, I actually feel that during the last year, we have seen many interesting new things happening on the financial scene and in the financial sector. So I wonder how this looks from your perspective.
Yeah, look, I think it's again very industry specific, right? So I think, and it's issue specific. So I would say in areas like renewable energy, let's take that one example. You know, there are sectors that it's very clear where the opportunity or the downside exists, and where investors are becoming increasingly sophisticated in measuring and understanding what that means for future value and for shareholder value. I think there are other issues in the SDG grouping where actually investors are a very long way behind being able to understand the importance, the impact, tangible and intangible, on stakeholder groups and on the business climate, and the business climate dictating, you know, the environment in which business needs to have in order to thrive and be successful. So I think the investor and that piece. So I think first of all, what you're doing with PRI and the work that's going on is exactly the right kind of work to be doing. I think it is absolutely clear that if you believe in any of the pathways and the science that we talk about to achieve the SDGs by 2030, that requires enormous amounts of capital, which move existing allocation of capital from some industries to other industries, open up new opportunities, new markets, require new products and services on an industrial revolution scale. So I think investors are waking up to that. I think, though, at the more specific grounded level, they are not as good at being able to assess the opportunity. Equally, though, Lise, I would say, and maybe more for this audience, neither are CEOs and businesses necessarily very good at articulating that in a serious business-like way. So there is the danger also in almost that two ships pass in the night. And I think that, I mean, that's an English saying, but you know, dialogue of the deaf is something I have seen where we've actually had to go in and actually provide the bridge between the investors and the business leaders to be able to more sophisticatedly articulate not just the impact, but the value. And I think the one final thing I'd say, which the SDG ambition with SAP and Accenture and the UN Global Compact working together, is that as well as the management framework, you know, we are looking to go beyond that to look at the management tools that are required in areas like management information to be able to better understand the performance of your business on sustainability, science-based targets, responsible business themes, but also to make that link more to the core business and the way we measure and manage the core business. And I think that's a very exciting future iteration and development of SDG ambition that I think we can plug some important gaps for business.
Peter, thank you for great insights and comments, and I think you bring us to the perfect topic to end this conversation. The SDG ambition that we will be rolling out and driving together from 2020 and onwards. because we actually have a number of questions where people are saying, oh, what would be the right way to start for a CEO that is beginning his or her sustainability journey? And I actually think that the SDG ambition framework that we are putting out there, that focuses on how to really embed both principles and goals in all the strategy processes in a company, in operations, and in the way the company deals with its stakeholders, is actually an excellent way to start. It is very simple. It makes a lot of sense to ensure that principles are goals are embedded from the, how should I say, top of the company throughout the organization, and in the way we communicate with all the company's stakeholders. So for everybody who has been listening today, please stay tuned. We will launch the SDG ambition with the guidance and with the tools that we have been talking about briefly today. And please stay in touch. We will revert on all the questions that came in today, and wish all of you a happy new year, where we can hopefully in the next couple of years really see the needle move behind the goals. Thank you to all of you for joining us today. Peter, thank you. It was great to share this hour together with you as well. And we will now close the webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you.